Hey there, welcome back to another relaxing Reddit drama session while we explore this beautiful Minecraft world together. Imagine discovering your spouse has been secretly profiting off your identity in the darkest corners of the internet. The audacity is breathtaking, and sometimes the digital betrayal cuts deeper than anything in real life. Now, before we begin, just a quick shout out to the people who have been showing up actively to comment and support this channel. Thank you so much. It helps me more than you guys think. Now, what happens next is a roller coaster of confrontations, legal battles, and the persistent nightmare of trying to erase your digital footprint after someone else scattered it across the internet. So settle in, grab your favorite snack, and let me tell you about a marriage that crumbled faster than sand over a cactus. This first story still haunts me. It started when I was going through our monthly statements. Dave and I had been married for 5 years, and we shared all our accounts. I'd always been the one who kept track of our finances, not because I didn't trust him, but because he claimed to be bad with numbers. Looking back, I should have seen that for what it was, the first red flag. There were these recurring charges from different tech companies, mostly for video editing software. At first, I thought nothing of it. Dave worked in marketing, so I figured it was for his job. But then I noticed how much these subscriptions were costing us. Thousands of dollars for premium editing suites, AI enhancement tools, and cloud storage. When I texted him about it, he brushed it off with a quick work stuff, they'll reimburse me. The thing is, Dave had always been terrible at keeping receipts, so I decided to organize his expense claims to help him get that money back from his company. That's when I discovered his laptop hidden in the back of our closet. Not his work computer, but a high-end gaming laptop I never knew he owned. I shouldn't have opened it. Part of me wishes I'd just closed it and pretended I never found it. But curiosity got the better of me, and our marriage was about to crumble because of what I found. The password was my birthday. How thoughtful, right? Inside was a folder labeled Projects. When I clicked on it, my blood ran cold. Hundreds of videos, all organized by date, each with a thumbnail that made me sick to my stomach. It was my face, superimposed onto the bodies of adult film performers. The editing was so seamless that if you didn't know me personally, you'd never question if it was really me. I remember sitting there for hours, frozen in horror, clicking through file after file. Each video was worse than the last. Some used casual photos from my social media. Others, and this is what broke me, used pictures from our wedding day. Our wedding. He had used the happiest day of my life as source material to create these disgusting deepfakes. But that wasn't even the worst part. I discovered a spreadsheet tracking profits with links to various sketchy websites where he'd been selling these videos. 2 years of sales, over $80,000 in profit, all using my face without my knowledge or consent. He had essentially built a business trafficking fake pornography of his own wife. The betrayal was so profound I couldn't even cry. I just felt numb. This man who had vowed to love and protect me had violated me in the most intimate way possible, turning my identity into a product for strangers to consume. I didn't confront him right away. Instead, I methodically gathered evidence. I took screenshots, printed receipts, copied files, and documented everything. I even installed a small recording device in our living room, which is perfectly legal in our state as long as one party consents to the recording. When I finally confronted him, I was prepared. I laid out the printouts on our dining table, the screenshots, the financial records, everything. When he walked in and saw them, his face went white. "What is this?" he asked, like he had no idea what I was talking about. "You know exactly what this is," I said, hitting play on a video of my face edited onto someone else's body. The denials came first. It wasn't him. He was holding them for a friend. It was a project he never intended to share. Then the excuses. We needed the money. It wasn't really me in the videos. No one would ever know it was my face. Finally, as I kept pushing with evidence he couldn't deny, he broke down and confessed everything. The recording device caught it all. His admission that he'd been doing this for years, that he'd made tens of thousands of dollars, that he knew I would never have consented, so he simply didn't ask. "It's not like I was cheating on you," he had the audacity to say. "It's just pixels on a screen." It's hard to describe the hollow feeling that comes with discovering the person who's supposed to love you most sees you as nothing more than content to be exploited. I filed for divorce the next day. Then came the breaking point. During the divorce proceedings, his lawyer, who seemed almost as sleazy as him, tried to claim that these deep-fake videos were artistic expression, protected by free speech. The judge, a woman in her 60s who had clearly seen it all, wasn't having any of it. Artistic expression, she said, peering over her glasses. No, counselor. What we have here is fraud, exploitation, and a clear violation of privacy laws. The case quickly escalated beyond just our divorce. The FBI got involved when they realized the scale of his operation and how much money he'd made. Turns out, creating deep-fake pornography and selling it for profit while misrepresenting it as real is a federal crime. Who knew? Dave is now facing charges for revenge porn, fraud, and a host of other things I don't fully understand. All I know is that his actions have consequences far beyond our failed marriage. As for me, I've spent the past 6 months in a nightmare of trying to get these videos removed from the internet. It's like playing whack-a-mole. I get them taken down from one site, only to find them popping up on 3 more. I've hired a digital reputation management company, but they tell me this could take years, and there's no guarantee we'll ever completely erase them. The worst part is explaining to potential dates, employers, or even just friends who might stumble across these videos that no, that's not really me. And yes, my ex-husband is a monster who did this. Every time I have to tell the story, I relive the trauma all over again. I thought I knew the man I married. I thought we had a happy life together. But behind that facade was someone who saw me as nothing more than a product to be sold, a face to be exploited for profit. Sometimes I wonder if he ever loved me at all, or if I was just convenient source material living under the same roof. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these wild stories travel. Now, back to the nightmare, because what happened next with my neighbors made my husband's betrayal look tame. Speaking of technology exposing dark secrets, wait until you hear what one person's security camera revealed about their neighbor. Our neighborhood had always been one of those picture-perfect suburban streets where everyone knew each other's names and borrowed cups of sugar. Kids played in front yards, and pets roamed freely without anyone worrying. That was until cats started disappearing. It began with Mrs. Henderson's orange tabby, Oliver. He'd been an outdoor cat for years, always coming home for dinner like clockwork. Then one day, he just didn't return. We all helped put up missing posters and searched the nearby woods, thinking maybe he'd gotten lost or trapped somewhere. 2 weeks later, the Johnsons' black and white cat, Luna, vanished the same way. Again, the neighborhood rallied. We formed search parties, posted on community pages, checked local shelters. Nothing. When Mittens, the Miller family's tabby with distinctive white paws, became the third cat to disappear in less than a month, people started getting suspicious. Some blamed coyotes, others suggested a hawk might be hunting in the area. My daughter was devastated. She'd often play with Mittens when he wandered into our yard. I don't want our Whiskers to disappear too, she said through tears one night, clutching our Maine Coon to her chest. That's when I decided to take matters into my own hands. I've always been the tech guy on our street, the one neighbors call when their Wi-Fi goes down or they can't figure out why their printer isn't working. So naturally, I had some decent security equipment. I installed a motion-activated camera in the tree at the edge of our property, positioned to capture most of the street. If something was hunting these cats, I was going to catch it in action. For 3 days, nothing unusual happened. Just neighbors walking dogs, delivery drivers dropping off packages, kids riding bikes. Then, on the 4th night, the camera captured something that turned my stomach. It was around 2 a.m. when Mr. and Mrs. Chen, the elderly couple who lived 3 houses down, came out of their home. They were in their late 70s, had moved to our neighborhood about a year ago, and mostly kept to themselves. Everyone described them as sweet and quiet. The footage showed Mrs. Chen placing what looked like tuna on small paper plates near bushes at the edge of several properties, including where Mittens had last been seen. Then they went back home. Nothing too suspicious yet. Maybe they were just feeding strays, I thought. But 3 hours later they emerged again. This time, Mr. Chen carried a large burlap sack that was moving. The night vision on my camera clearly showed them returning to their house, with whatever was in that sack thrashing around. I felt my chest tighten. I stayed up the next night, watching the live feed from my camera. Sure enough, the Chens followed the same pattern, but this time I could clearly see a cat. It looked like the Anderson's grey tabby Scout, being lured by the food and then quickly grabbed and shoved into the sack. That's when everything unraveled. I followed them with my camera's zoom function as they took the sack behind their house to a small shed in their backyard. They didn't emerge for nearly an hour. When they did, the sack was empty, and they were carrying small packages wrapped in butcher paper to their house. I felt physically sick. Surely I was misinterpreting what I was seeing. There had to be some innocent explanation. Maybe they were rescuing strays and taking them to a shelter? But at 3 a.m., and why the secret butcher packages? The next morning, I watched more footage and saw something that removed all doubt. The camera had captured the Chens in their backyard, and I could see into their kitchen window. Mrs. Chen was clearly skinning what appeared to be a cat, a tabby with white paws that looked exactly like the missing mittens. I recognized him from the posters plastered all over the neighborhood. I called the police immediately. The officer who took my call sounded skeptical. "Sir, are you sure you're not misinterpreting what you're seeing? The Chens are respected members of the community." I emailed them the footage. 20 minutes later, the officer called back. "While this is concerning, we need more concrete evidence before we can get a warrant. The video quality isn't clear enough to definitively prove what they're doing." I couldn't believe it. I'd literally filmed them capturing a cat and bringing it to their shed, then carrying packages of meat back to their house. How much more evidence did they need? "Keep monitoring the situation," the officer suggested. "If you can get clearer footage, particularly of what's happening in that shed, we'll have a stronger case." So that's what I did. For the next 2 weeks, I became a one-man surveillance operation. I installed additional cameras with better resolution, focusing on the Chen's backyard and shed. I documented everything: the times they went hunting, which houses they targeted, how long they spent in the shed afterward. And here's where it gets absurd. One night I watched as they left their back door open for a moment, and a neighbor's chihuahua wandered inside, drawn by what I assume was the smell of food. They closed the door behind it. 40 minutes later, more packages went into their freezer. The breaking point came when I managed to capture clear footage of them working in the shed with the door open. They had a makeshift butchering station set up, complete with knives, a small table, and, most disturbingly, a smoking apparatus that I later learned was a kind of home smokehouse. This wasn't just some weird misunderstanding. This elderly couple was systematically hunting, killing, and eating their neighbors' beloved pets. I compiled all my evidence, over 40 hours of footage, timestamps, correlations with missing pet reports, and even photos I'd taken with a telephoto lens of what appeared to be a handwritten recipe book visible through their kitchen window. I marched down to the police station and refused to leave until a detective reviewed everything. 3 days later, police executed a search warrant on the Chen's home. What they found confirmed our worst fears and then some. 3 freezers in their basement were filled with neatly packaged meat, many packages labeled with what could only be described as names: tabby, black one, spotted dog. They found collars, dozens of them, kept in a display case like trophies. And the recipe book, written in both English and Mandarin, detailed preparation methods for different breeds of cats and small dogs. When confronted, the Chens didn't even try to deny it. They claimed it was a cultural tradition from their homeland, insisting that in their village, cats and dogs were considered food animals, no different than chickens or pigs. They seemed genuinely confused about why everyone was so upset. "We waste nothing," Mrs. Chen reportedly told officers. "We honor the animals by using every part." Their defense attorney later tried to build a case around cultural differences and claimed the Chens didn't understand American pet ownership norms. That argument fell apart when investigators discovered they'd lived in the US for over 40 years before moving to our neighborhood, and their previous community had experienced similar pet disappearances. They're both in prison now, convicted on multiple counts of animal cruelty, theft, and some property law violations that the prosecutor creatively applied to the situation. The story made national news, and our little street became briefly infamous as the place where the pet-eating pensioners had lived. The neighborhood has never quite recovered. People keep their pets indoors now. Parents watch their children more closely. And me? I've taken down most of my cameras, but I still check the one overlooking our street every morning, just to be sure. I still can't look at my own cat the same way. Every time Whiskers jumps into my lap, I think about what could have happened to him, about what did happen to so many beloved pets on our street. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, certain I heard the Chens placing tuna on paper plates outside, even though I know they're locked away. The worst part is knowing that if I hadn't installed that first camera, they might never have been caught. How many more pets would have disappeared? How many more families would have searched the woods, calling their pet's name, never knowing that their furry family member had ended up on someone's dinner table? But sometimes the real horror isn't what strangers do. It's discovering your own family has been planning your demise. I've been married to Elaine for 8 years. She's brilliant, ambitious, and honestly a little intimidating sometimes. I'm more of the laid-back type. I teach high school geography and coach the rock climbing team. We balance each other out, or at least that's what I thought until last month, when I discovered her book club wasn't discussing the latest bestsellers. Elaine started this club about 2 years ago. Every Thursday, like clockwork, 5 or 6 women would come over to our house from 7 to 10 p.m. I'd usually make myself scarce, head to the climbing gym, grab beers with colleagues, or crash at my buddy Mike's place to play video games. I never gave it much thought. They drank wine, laughed a lot, and occasionally I'd hear them debating what seemed like plot points. I even joked about it being more of a wine club than a book club, which Elaine always laughed off a bit too enthusiastically. That Thursday started like any other. I left for work, taught my classes, and was heading to afternoon climbing practice when the stomach bug that had been making its way through the student body finally caught up with me. By 3 p.m., I was a disaster. I texted the assistant coach to take over and drove home, planning to barricade myself in the bathroom and bedroom until this passed. I texted Elaine that I was homesick, but got no response. That wasn't unusual. She's a corporate attorney, and often in meetings where she can't check her phone. What was unusual was that I'd completely forgotten it was Thursday, and by 6:45 p.m., I was awakened from a fever nap by the sound of the front door opening. I heard Elaine's voice. He's at climbing practice, then meeting Mike. We have until at least 10, maybe later if they go for drinks after. Something about her tone made me freeze. It wasn't her normal voice. It was colder, more calculated. I slipped out of bed and moved toward our bedroom door, which was slightly ajar. "Did you bring the policy documents?" I heard another woman ask. "Yes, all 3 of them. 2 million total if we do this right," Elaine replied. My fever-addled brain couldn't process what I was hearing. Policy documents, 2 million, do what right? I should have revealed myself then, asked what was going on. Instead, I grabbed my phone and started recording. Then I did something that probably saved my life. I quietly slipped into our walk-in closet and hid behind my hanging suits, leaving the closet door cracked just enough to hear. For the next hour, I listened in absolute horror as my wife and 5 other women I knew had dinner with, considered friends, discussed in meticulous detail how they were going to kill me. "The hiking trip next month is perfect," said Jessica, who I'd helped move furniture just last weekend. "No witnesses, dangerous terrain, and he's always taking risks on those climbs." "I've already contacted our guy about the equipment sabotage," Elaine said. "The rope will look like normal wear and tear, even to experienced climbers. A tragic accident, nothing more." They discussed how Elaine had gradually increased my life insurance over the past 2 years, 3 separate policies with 3 different companies to avoid suspicion, how she'd been documenting my increasing recklessness with climbing to establish a pattern, how she'd been slowly introducing prescription sleep medication into my evening drinks to make me less careful and create a toxicology finding that would support the accident narrative. That explained why I'd been feeling so groggy some mornings. I'd blamed it on stress at work. "Remember, we need to establish the timeline carefully," said Margaret, my next-door neighbor who had borrowed my lawnmower just last week. "Elaine needs to be seen publicly elsewhere when it happens. The rest of us provide her alibi, just like with Daniel and Robert." Daniel and Robert? The names didn't mean anything to me, but the implication was clear. This hadn't been their first accident. I sat there shaking, and not just from the fever. The women I was listening to weren't discussing fictional characters. They were discussing me, my death, my accident, all while drinking the expensive Cabernet I'd bought Elaine for her birthday. That's when everything unraveled. As they continued talking, I learned that this book club had been operating for years. They rotated who would be the beneficiary, whose husband would have the accident, and they all participated in the planning and cover-up. They called themselves the First Wives Final Chapter Club, and apparently they'd already helped 2 members become wealthy widows. I sat in that closet for 3 hours, recording everything, as they discussed alibis, evidence cleaning, and how to act appropriately grieving. My own wife demonstrated how she would break down at my funeral. They even practiced the hysterical call to 911 she would make when I didn't return from my climb. When they finally left around 10:30, I waited another 30 minutes before emerging, terrified Elaine might realize I'd been home. I snuck out to my car and drove straight to Mike's apartment, where I spent the night pretending I'd gotten too drunk to drive home after climbing. I texted Elaine that I'd crashed there, and she responded with a sweet message telling me to have fun and she loved me. She loved me so much she'd been planning my death for months. I didn't go to the police immediately. Maybe that was stupid, but I was afraid. What if they didn't believe me? What if my recording wasn't enough proof? What if I was misinterpreting something? And honestly, what if these women had connections in the police department? My paranoia was off the charts. Instead, I decided to gather more evidence while pretending everything was normal. For 2 excruciating weeks, I lived with my would-be murderer. I ate her cooking only from the same dishes she ate from, drank nothing that I hadn't opened myself, and pretended I had no idea she was planning to kill me in exactly 18 days. During those 2 weeks, I set up hidden cameras in our house. I forwarded all the recordings and evidence to a secure email account and to Mike, with instructions to go to the FBI if anything happened to me. I recorded conversations where I subtly led Elaine to discuss our upcoming hiking trip and the life insurance policies she'd thoughtfully taken out for us. And then came the breaking point. I found actual evidence of tampering with my climbing gear, microscopic cuts in my rope that would have snapped under pressure. That night, I took all my evidence directly to the FBI field office in our city. Not the local police, who might have connections to these women, but the federal authorities. They took it seriously, very seriously, especially when they ran background checks on the other book club members and discovered that yes, 2 of them had lost husbands in the past 3 years, Daniel Harrison and Robert Palmer. Both had died in accidents, one in a household electrocution, another in a car crash with brake failure. Both deaths had resulted in significant insurance payouts. The FBI wanted to catch them all together, preferably discussing their plans. So we set up a sting operation. The agent suggested I wear a wire and try to get Elaine to discuss it. But I refused. I knew she was too smart for that. Instead, I suggested something more dramatic. Our wedding anniversary was in 1 week. I always took Elaine to the same upscale restaurant downtown. The FBI could wire the private dining room I'd already reserved and catch all 6 women together when they arrived for the celebration that would actually be their last planning session before my accident. The agents agreed. For the next week, I continued the performance of my life, acting like a clueless, loving husband while knowing my wife was actively planning my murder. On our anniversary night, I brought Elaine to the restaurant. I'd told her I'd invited the book club ladies to join us for dessert, to thank them for being such good friends to her. She seemed nervous but agreed. When they all arrived, champagne was poured and I raised a toast. To my beautiful wife and her amazing friends. Thank you for everything you've planned for me. The emphasis I put on planned made Elaine's smile falter just slightly. And then the FBI agents emerged from the kitchen and adjacent dining area. I've never seen 6 faces drain of color so quickly. The FBI had enough evidence to arrest all of them on conspiracy charges right there in the restaurant. Turns out my recordings, combined with the physical evidence of the tampered climbing gear and the FBI's findings about the 2 previous murders, were more than enough. The case never went to trial. When faced with the mountain of evidence, 5 of the 6 women took plea deals, testifying against Elaine as the ringleader. My ex-wife, is now serving 25 to life for conspiracy to commit murder and for her role in the deaths of Daniel and Robert. I've moved to a different state and changed my name. I still teach, still climb, but I do both looking over my shoulder. The other book club members will be out of prison eventually. I've developed insomnia, trust issues, and a habit of checking my car's brake lines every morning. Sometimes I wonder what I missed, what signs I should have seen. Was it something I did? Was our marriage always a lie? Or did something change? I'll probably never know. But one thing's for sure, I've permanently lost my taste for book clubs, Cabernet, and marriage. Identity theft usually means stolen credit cards, but one Redditor discovered their grandmother had stolen an entire life. Grandma Patricia passed away last month at 86. She was the backbone of our family, the one who hosted Christmas dinner, remembered every birthday, and always had freshly baked cookies when we visited. Mom took it especially hard since they'd been close. As her only grandson, I volunteered to help clean out Grandma's house. It was one of those classic craftsman-style homes she'd lived in for over 30 years. Grandpa died when I was little, so she'd been alone there for as long as I could remember. The main floors were immaculate. Grandma was organized to a fault. But then there was the attic. I haven't been up there in years, Mum said, handing me the key to the small padlock on the attic door. Mum always said it was just old Christmas decorations and Grandpa's things. The attic was stifling in the summer heat, dust particles dancing in the beams of light from the small window. At first glance, it was what you'd expect. Boxes labeled EMAS, old suitcases, furniture covered in sheets. I started with a trunk near the window, figuring I'd work my way toward the door. Inside the first trunk were photo albums I'd never seen before. Pictures of Grandma when she was younger, before she met Grandpa. She looked different somehow. Her hair was darker and she wore it in a style I'd never seen in our family photos. Strange, but not alarming. The second trunk changed everything. Inside were 2 lock boxes. The first contained documents for Patricia Mills, my grandmother's name, birth certificate, social security card, passport, marriage license to Grandpa. Nothing unusual there, but the second box contained another complete set of identification documents. Birth certificate, social security card, old IDs, all with my grandmother's face but the name Nancy Kowalski. My first thought was identity theft, that someone had stolen Grandma's identity. But the birth date on Nancy's certificate was the same as Grandma's, and the photos were clearly her at different ages. The documents for Nancy stopped abruptly in 1983, the same year the earliest Patricia Mills documents appeared. I brought everything downstairs to show Mum. Her face went pale as she looked through the papers. "This can't be right," she whispered. "Mum was always Patricia. I don't understand." We spent that night spreading documents across the dining room table, piecing together a timeline. Nancy Kowalski was born in Chicago in 1936. She worked as an accountant for a manufacturing company. Her trail ended in 1983. Patricia Mills was born in 1936 in Cleveland, and her paper trail began in 1983 when she applied for a new Social Security card in California, claiming her original was lost. She met Grandpa a year later. That's when everything unraveled. I found a small notebook in the second lockbox with newspaper clippings. One headline from March 1983 read, "Local woman dies in house fire." The article described how Patricia Mills, 47, died when her Cleveland home burned down. The fire was so intense that dental records were needed to identify the body. Another clipping from 2 months earlier had the headline, "Accountant wanted for questioning in missing funds case." The article featured a grainy photo of Nancy Kowalski, wanted in connection with $400,000 missing from the company where she worked. We sat in stunned silence, the implication sinking in. My grandmother wasn't Patricia Mills. Patricia Mills had died in that fire. My grandmother was Nancy Kowalski, who had apparently stolen a dead woman's identity after embezzling a fortune from her employer. "This can't be right," Mum kept repeating. "There has to be an explanation." But the deeper we dug, the worse it got. In a sealed envelope at the bottom of the trunk, we found Nancy Kowalski's original birth certificate and a handwritten confession, dated just last year. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've discovered the truth," it began. "I was born Nancy Kowalski. In 1982, I made a terrible mistake. The company I worked for was struggling, and they were going to cut pensions for retired employees. I started skimming money to create a fund for them, but it spiraled out of control. When an audit was announced, I panicked and took the money. I intended to return it once I had exposed the company's corruption, but things went wrong." The letter detailed how she fled to Cleveland, where she rented a room from Patricia Mills. When the house caught fire and Patricia died, Nancy saw an opportunity. She took Patricia's identification documents that had survived in a fireproof box and assumed her identity, moving to California to start fresh. I never meant to live a lie for so long, the letter continued. But then I met your grandfather, and we built a life, had your mother, and by then, how could I explain? The years passed, and Patricia became more real to me than Nancy ever was. And here's where it gets absurd. The letter ended with detailed instructions for how to manage her estate. She'd invested the stolen money over the years and used it to buy the house, put Mom through college, and build her retirement fund. Every penny our family had was essentially the fruit of stolen money, carefully tended for 40 years. Mum was in shock. She'd been born 2 years after Grandma, Nancy, became Patricia. Her birth certificate listed Patricia Mills as her mother. Legally, Mum's mother never existed. Everything she ever told me was a lie, Mum said, tears streaming down her face. Who she was, where she came from, her childhood stories. Was anything real? I tried to comfort her, but what could I say? The woman who raised me, who taught me to ride a bike and helped me with my math homework, who I'd loved my whole life, was a complete stranger. Then came the breaking point. In a safety deposit box key we found in the letter's envelope, we discovered the remaining evidence of Grandma's double life. Financial records showed she'd invested the embezzled money through various accounts over the years, all under Patricia's name. She'd created such an intricate web of legitimate-seeming transactions that tracking the original stolen money would be nearly impossible. There were also letters, dozens of them, that she'd written to her parents and sister over the years but never sent. Letters describing her new life, her marriage, the birth of her granddaughter, all the milestones she couldn't share with them because Nancy Kowalski was supposedly dead. The statute of limitations for the embezzlement had long passed, but the identity theft had continued until her death. We consulted a lawyer who advised us that legally we weren't obligated to report what we'd found. The company she'd stolen from had gone bankrupt in the 1990s, and Patricia Mills had no surviving family to be harmed by the identity theft. But the damage to our family was done. Mum couldn't reconcile the loving mother she knew with this stranger who had lived a complete lie for 40 years. Every memory was now tainted, every childhood story, every family tradition. Was it Patricia's or Nancy's? Had she invented her entire history? The worst part was the practical nightmare that followed. Technically, Mom's birth certificate listed a woman who hadn't actually given birth to her. Our last name, Mills, wasn't legally ours. The house, the investments, everything Grandma left us existed in a legal grey area, since Patricia Mills had never legally existed as the woman we knew. We spent nearly a year untangling the mess. Mom had to legally change her name since the identity she'd been using was based on fraudulent documents. I had to change mine too since my birth certificate listed Mum's maiden name as Mills. We had to negotiate with the IRS about the estate taxes, carefully revealing just enough information to resolve the immediate issues without exposing the full extent of Grandma's deception. The hardest part wasn't the legal or financial complications, though. It was the emotional toll. Every memory I had of my grandmother was now filtered through this new knowledge. When I remembered her teaching me to bake her famous family cookies, I now wondered if the recipe had actually belonged to Patricia Mills, or if it was one of the few genuine things from Nancy Kowalski's real life. Mom found a therapist who specialized in family trauma, which helped her process the revelation that her entire identity was built on a lie. She's slowly coming to terms with it, trying to separate the love that was real from the history that wasn't. As for me, I'm left with a box of photographs of a woman I thought I knew, and the understanding that sometimes the people closest to us have depths we never imagined. I wonder if in her final years, Grandma, whoever she was, had found peace with her double life, or if she went to her grave haunted by the woman she'd left behind and the one whose life she'd stolen. I still miss her. Despite everything, I miss her, and that's the most confusing part of all. Office life is supposed to be boring, but imagine discovering your coworker had turned the workplace into their permanent residence. It all started with the noises. Working late at Pinnacle Solutions, our mid-sized marketing firm, I'd hear strange sounds coming from above the drop ceiling, subtle creaks and shuffles that I initially attributed to the building settling, or maybe mice. Everyone has stories about office mice, right? But it wasn't just the noises. Food began disappearing from the break room fridge. Not entire lunches, but small items that could easily go unnoticed. Half a sandwich here, a few grapes there, a yogurt that you might convince yourself you'd already eaten. People started labeling their food more aggressively. Passive-aggressive notes appeared on the refrigerator door, but the disappearances continued. Then there were the electronics. Our conference room TV would sometimes be warm in the morning, as if it had been used overnight. Computers occasionally showed signs of activity during off hours. The office printer would have jobs in its queue that nobody remembered sending. We all joked about having an office ghost. Marketing manager Melissa even named it Pinnacle Poltergeist and blamed it whenever something went wrong. Polly deleted my presentation, or Polly must have eaten my leftovers. It became part of our office culture, a harmless explanation for the unexplainable. I never gave it much serious thought until about 2 months ago. I was working on a massive client pitch that had to be finished by morning. By 2 a.m., I was the only one left in the office, bleary-eyed and caffeine jittery, when I heard a distinct thump above my head. Not a settling building noise, a footstep. I froze, fingers hovering over my keyboard. Another step, then another. Someone was walking in the ceiling. I thought about calling security, but honestly, I was too terrified to speak. So instead, I did what any rational person would do. I hid under my desk and recorded the sounds on my phone. For 20 minutes, I listened to the movement above. Then it stopped directly over the hallway outside my cubicle. What happened next still gives me chills. There was a subtle shifting sound, and when I peeked out, I saw a ceiling tile move slightly. Then, I swear I'm not making this up, a pair of feet dangled down from the ceiling, followed by legs clad in faded jeans. I watched, paralyzed, as a full-grown man dropped silently from our office ceiling. In the dim emergency lighting, I recognized him immediately. Gary Peterson from IT, or rather, formerly from IT. Gary had been laid off during company restructuring 3 years ago, yet here he was, in the middle of the night, looking surprisingly well kept for someone who had just emerged from a ceiling. He didn't see me as he padded softly toward the break room. Once he disappeared around the corner, I crawled out from under my desk and followed at a distance. Peering around the doorway, I watched as Gary casually opened the refrigerator, surveyed its contents, and selected various items: an apple from marketing director Jim's lunch bag, half a sandwich from the new intern's container, a can of seltzer that I'm pretty sure belonged to me. That's when everything unraveled. He caught my reflection in the microwave door. Our eyes met, and for a moment we both froze. Then Gary smiled, not a threatening smile, but something almost sheepish. "Hey, Alex," he said, as if running into me at a grocery store. "Working late?" I stammered something unintelligible while my brain tried to process what was happening. Gary had been laid off years ago. Why was he in our office at 2 a.m.? And how did he know my name? I'd been hired after he left. "You're probably confused," he continued, taking a bite of the stolen sandwich. "Want to see something cool?" Before I could respond, he walked past me toward the supply closet. Against all better judgment, I followed. Inside, he climbed onto a shelf and pushed up a ceiling tile, then pulled himself up with surprising agility. "Come on up," he called down. "It's roomier than you'd think." And that's how at 2:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, I found myself climbing into the crawl space above our office drop ceiling. What I saw there defied belief. Gary had built an entire living space in the 3 feet between the drop ceiling and the actual structural ceiling. Using the building's support beams, he'd created a network of rooms spanning nearly the entire office, a sleeping area with a thin mattress and pillow, a kitchen with a hot plate and mini fridge plugged into power sources he'd rigged from the ceiling lights. He even had a chemical camping toilet discreetly hidden behind a makeshift privacy screen. "Welcome to Chateau Gary," he said, gesturing proudly around his ceiling kingdom. "Home sweet home for the past 3 years. And here's where it gets absurd." Gary explained that when he was laid off, he'd been in the middle of a nasty divorce and couldn't afford rent anywhere in the city. He'd kept his office key and security pass, and one night came back to sleep in the office as a temporary solution. "But then I realized nobody uses the crawl space," he explained, showing me how he'd reinforced the ceiling grid to support his weight. "The building has heating, AC, internet, a gym with showers in the basement, and the cleaning crew restocks toilet paper regularly. Why would I leave?" He'd established a routine. During the day, he'd either sleep or leave the building, pretending to be a client or maintenance worker if questioned. At night, he'd emerge to shower in the basement gym, do laundry in the janitor's sink, use the office amenities, and occasionally borrow small food items from the refrigerator. Nobody notices if you take a little bit from everyone, he explained. The key is moderation. I was simultaneously horrified and fascinated. Part of me wanted to call security immediately, but another part couldn't help but be impressed by his ingenuity. He'd survived for 3 years right above our heads, and nobody had noticed. But that wasn't even the worst part. As Gary continued his proud tour of his ceiling dwelling, he casually mentioned how he'd kept himself entertained all these years. The best part is learning everyone's secrets, he said, pulling out a laptop. I know all the Wi-Fi passwords, and it's amazing what people don't encrypt. Plus, I can hear everything through these ceiling tiles. He showed me what could only be described as a comprehensive surveillance operation. He had access to most of the company email accounts. He kept notes on personal conversations he overheard. He even attended Zoom meetings by quietly listening from above the conference rooms. I know who's sleeping with whom, who's interviewing for new jobs, what everyone makes, he boasted. I know that you've been fudging your timesheets to get extra overtime, by the way. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a homeless guy finding shelter. This was an invasion of privacy on an unprecedented scale. He had information on everyone: medical issues, relationship problems, salary negotiations, corporate strategies. Don't worry, he said, misreading my horror as concern for myself. I'm not judging. We all do what we need to survive. I made up an excuse about needing to finish my work and climb back down. The moment I was sure Gary had returned to his ceiling lair, I called both building security and the police. When they arrived, Gary was surprisingly calm about the whole thing. He even tried to claim squatters' rights, arguing that he'd established residence in the building for over 3 years. The police weren't buying it. As they escorted him out, officers discovered his journal, a meticulously detailed account of life in our office: who came in early, who stayed late, who cried in the bathroom, who took extra supplies home. 3 years of our private conversations, actions, and emails, all carefully documented by our ceiling dweller. Corporate was mortified when they realized the extent of the breach. Not only had Gary been living in our ceiling, but he'd had access to confidential client information, financial data, and personal correspondence for years. The potential liability was enormous. They told us the office would be closed for 2 weeks for renovations, but really they were doing a full security overhaul and sweeping for any surveillance equipment Gary might have planted. It had to reset every password, encrypt every database, and audit every system for potential breaches. When we finally returned to the office, all the ceiling tiles had been replaced with a new system that couldn't be easily moved. Security badges now had to be renewed monthly, and we had motion sensors installed throughout the building. The strangest part? I sometimes miss Gary. Not the privacy invasion, of course, but the idea that our office ghost had been real. Whenever something goes missing now, there's no Polly to blame, just regular human forgetfulness. I found myself looking up at the new ceiling tiles and wondering if he found somewhere else to live, or if there's another Gary in another office, building a little ceiling apartment while workers below swap ghost stories about missing lunches and strange noises in the night. Family reunions are awkward enough without discovering your dead sibling has been living next door. I still remember the call like it was yesterday. My sister Emma had been driving back from university when her car went off a bridge. The police said the impact would have killed her instantly, but they couldn't recover her body from the river. After 3 days of searching, they declared it a recovery mission, not a rescue. We held a funeral with an empty casket, my parents shattered by the loss of their oldest child. That was 15 years ago. I was 19 when Emma died, and she was 22, just about to graduate with her master's degree in psychology. We were close, had been since we were kids. Growing up in our household, we had to be. Our father wasn't physically abusive, but his emotional manipulation and verbal tirades were a special kind of hell. Mom was just absent, lost in prescription medications and her own trauma. I moved on with my life the best I could. Finished school, got a decent job in marketing, bought a small house in a quiet suburb 2 hours from my hometown. I dated, had a few serious relationships, but nothing stuck. Friends said I had commitment issues. Maybe they were right. Losing Emma had left a hole in my life that nothing seemed to fill. Last month, a new family moved in next door, Mark and Jennifer Calloway. He's an architect who works mostly from home. She's a high school guidance counselor. They seemed nice enough, brought over a bottle of wine to introduce themselves. I invited them in for a glass. That's when my world imploded. Jennifer Calloway was my sister Emma. Same heart-shaped face, same birthmark just below her left ear, same habit of twirling her hair when she was nervous, which she was doing constantly during that first meeting. She dyed her naturally auburn hair blonde and wore colored contacts to change her hazel eyes to blue. But it was her, my sister, the one I'd mourned for 15 years. I managed to keep it together somehow, making small talk while my mind raced and my hands shook. When they left, I collapsed on my couch, hyperventilating. Was I going crazy? Had grief finally broken my brain, making me see my dead sister and my new neighbor? I dug out old family photos that night. There was no doubt, despite the hair color and subtle changes that 15 years brings, Jennifer was Emma. The resemblance was too perfect, the way her nose crinkled when she laughed, the slight asymmetry of her smile, that distinctive birthmark. This wasn't a doppelganger or my imagination. My dead sister was living next door. For a week, I watched her. I'm not proud of that, but I needed to be certain before I did anything rash. I observed her habits, listened to her voice, studied her mannerisms. I even manufactured reasons to run into her. Borrowing sugar, asking about trash pickup schedules. Each interaction only confirmed what I already knew. Jennifer Calloway was Emma Sullivan, my sister, back from the dead. That's when everything unraveled. I waited until I knew Mark was at a client meeting, then went over with a photo album. Jennifer answered the door with a welcoming smile that vanished when she saw my expression. "We need to talk, Emma," I said quietly. She tried to deny it, of course, claimed I had her confused with someone else, said her name was Jennifer and always had been. But her hands were shaking, and that old tell, the hair twirling, gave her away. I opened the photo album to a picture of us at the beach when she was 16 and I was 13. "That birthmark below your ear is pretty distinctive, Emma. So is that scar on your wrist from when you fell out of our treehouse in 5th grade?" She stopped denying it when I showed her the photo of us at her high school graduation. Something in her crumpled, and she invited me inside. We sat at her kitchen island, the perfect suburban kitchen of a woman who wasn't supposed to exist, and she told me everything. Emma hadn't died in that car accident. She'd planned the whole thing, drove her car off the bridge deliberately when no one was around, swam to shore downstream, and hitchhiked to a bus station with the go bag she'd hidden in the woods the day before. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Do you have any idea what we went through? What I went through?" "I had my reasons," she said, staring into her coffee mug. "More than one." The truth was both simpler and more complicated than I could have imagined. Emma had been drowning in student loan debt, nearly $200,000 for her undergraduate and master's degrees. On top of that, our father's emotional abuse had escalated. He'd been threatening to control where she worked, where she lived, who she dated, leveraging the fact that he'd co-signed her loans. "He said I'd never be free of him," she explained, tears streaming down her face. And he was right. The debt meant I'd be under his thumb for decades. I saw only one way out. She'd researched how to disappear for months, created a new identity, Jessica Peters initially, with forged documents she'd purchased online. She moved to Oregon, about as far from our Pennsylvania home as she could get. She worked cash jobs for years, kept her head down. Eventually, she established a new legitimate identity as Jennifer Morris, got her teaching credentials under that name, met Mark, and built a new life. "I never thought I'd end up back here," she said. "Mark got the job offer, and it seemed like a good opportunity. I'd been gone 15 years. What were the chances?" The chances were apparently better than she'd thought. Of all the houses in all the neighborhoods in all the suburbs, she moved in next door to her brother. "Does Mark know?" I asked. She shook her head. "No one knows. Not Mark, not his family. No one." I sat with that for a minute. My sister had been alive all this time, building a life, making friends, falling in love, while we mourned her, while I visited an empty grave on her birthday every year, while our mother sank deeper into depression and our father grew increasingly bitter. "Our parents need to know you're alive," I said finally, and that's where things went from bad to unhinged. Emma, or Jennifer, panicked. She begged me to keep her secret, claimed that revealing the truth would destroy everything she'd built. Her marriage, her career, possibly even her freedom. Faking your own death and creating false identities isn't exactly legal. Please, she pleaded. I'm happy now. I'm finally free of him. Don't take that away from me. I understood her fear of our father. I really did. But I'd spent 15 years grieving her. Our mother had never recovered from her death. The weight of that deception was too heavy to bear. I need time to think, I told her, and left. For days, I wrestled with what to do. Part of me wanted to respect her choice, to protect the life she'd built for herself. Another part was furious that she'd let us suffer while she got a clean slate. But mostly, I just wanted my sister back. In the end, I told our parents. I know that makes me sound terrible, but try to understand. I'd carried the burden of her loss for 15 years. Finding her alive broke something in me, reopened all those old wounds. I couldn't bear the weight of her secret. Mom collapsed when I told them. Dad went through every emotion in rapid succession: disbelief, joy, and then a cold, calculating anger that reminded me exactly why Emma had run in the first place. "Where is she?" he demanded. I refused to tell him, but it didn't matter. He hired a private investigator who tracked her down within days. What followed was the kind of family explosion that leaves nothing but scorched earth behind. Dad threatened legal action against Emma for the insurance payout we'd received after her death, against Mark's architecture firm for employing an identity thief, against anyone who got in his way. Mum swung between hysterical joy and devastating betrayal. Mark learned his entire marriage was built on a lie, and Emma lost everything. Again. She and Mark moved away 3 weeks later. He was trying to forgive her, trying to understand, but the foundation of trust was shattered. Last I heard, they were in counseling, living under new names in yet another state. Our parents are still dealing with the fallout. Mum's in intensive therapy. Dad's bitterness has curdled into something even uglier than before. And me, I'm left with the knowledge that I chose truth over my sister's happiness. And I'm still not sure it was the right choice. Emma sent me one last email before she disappeared again. I forgive you, but please don't find me this time. Some people need to stay dead. I've respected her wish. Sometimes, late at night, I look at the empty house next door and wonder what would have happened if I'd kept her secret, if I'd chosen her over the truth. But the thing about secrets that big is they consume you from the inside out. I couldn't carry it. Maybe that makes me weak. Maybe it just makes me human. Either way, Emma's gone again, and this time, I'm letting her stay dead. Think your boss is bad? At least they're not monetizing your meetings in ways that would make HR spontaneously combust. I should have known something was off about Roger's obsession with video calls. As the regional manager at Westfield Marketing, he insisted that every meeting, no matter how brief, be conducted with cameras on. Even a quick 5-minute check-in required full video presence. At first, I chalked it up to his management style. Maybe he believed in the importance of face-to-face communication, even if it was digital. What struck me as peculiar, though, was his camera setup. While the rest of us showed our faces in standard head and shoulders framing, Roger's camera was positioned to capture his entire office. You could see him sitting at his desk, the door behind him, the bookshelf to his right, everything. When I asked about it once, he said it helped him maintain a professional atmosphere, and that seeing his full office space established authority. I didn't question it further. After all, he was the boss. I'd been with the company for 3 years when things started to make sense. It happened by complete accident. I was researching competitors' digital marketing strategies and went down an internet rabbit hole, clicking through various links and redirects. Somehow, and I still don't know exactly how, I landed on a site called Office Domination Live. The site was behind a paywall, but the preview thumbnails were visible on the landing page. My blood ran cold when I saw myself in one of them. It was from my performance review 2 weeks earlier, where Roger had criticized my handling of the Anderson account. The thumbnail showed me looking uncomfortable, eyes downcast, while Roger loomed over his desk pointing at some papers. I felt sick. This couldn't be what it looked like. Maybe someone had stolen the footage from our company servers. But then I saw other thumbnails, colleagues in similar situations, all from Roger's distinctive office with that same wide-angle camera shot. That's when everything unraveled. With shaking hands, I created an account using a prepaid card. The site's content was exactly what I feared. Roger had been live streaming our meetings, particularly ones where he was in a position of authority or delivering criticism, to a fetish website that specialized in workplace humiliation content. Performance reviews, disciplinary meetings, even terminations, all broadcast to paying subscribers who got off on watching people being professionally dominated. The comment section was horrifying. Viewers would make explicit remarks about employees' reactions, our appearances, how we took criticism. Some would request specific types of humiliation for future streams. The most popular video, with over 5,000 views, was of me being reprimanded for arriving late to a client meeting after my car broke down. Roger had made me stand while he lectured me for 20 minutes. But that wasn't even the worst part. The site had a premium membership tier where Roger provided additional information about the employees. Personal details, home addresses, social media profiles, information that should have been confidential. He was essentially doxing us to these fetishists, creating an environment where they could potentially harass us outside of work. I spent the entire night documenting everything, taking screenshots, recording video evidence, noting dates and participants. By morning, I had compiled a dossier that proved beyond doubt what was happening. Rather than confronting Roger directly, I contacted HR at our corporate headquarters. They were stunned into silence. Within hours, they had legal involved, and by the end of the day, Roger's access to company systems was revoked. He was escorted from the building by security, still protesting that it was all performance art and that we had implicitly consented by agreeing to video calls. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. The company investigation revealed Roger had been running this operation for over 2 years and had featured 23 different employees in his streams. He'd made nearly $300,000 from subscriptions and special request sessions where viewers would pay extra for him to criticize employees in specific ways. He had actual scripts prepared for our meetings, tailored to what his audience wanted to see. The legal implications were staggering. Not only had he violated countless privacy laws and company policies, but the selling of personal information crossed into criminal territory. The FBI got involved when they discovered he'd been selling detailed profiles of employees to his most loyal subscribers. The company, desperate to avoid publicity and mitigate damages, moved quickly to settle with all affected employees. The final settlement was in the millions, split among the victims based on how extensively they'd been featured in Roger's content. Roger himself is facing both civil and criminal charges. Last I heard, he was claiming this was all protected under free speech laws. His attorney dropped him when evidence emerged that he'd been planning to expand his operation to include hidden cameras in the office bathrooms. The psychological impact has been profound for all of us. I received enough in the settlement to take 6 months off work for therapy, which I desperately needed. I still can't do video calls without checking multiple times if I'm being recorded. I've covered all the cameras in my house with tape. I changed my phone number, deleted social media accounts, and moved to a new apartment. The company implemented strict new privacy policies and completely revamped their management structure. They offered all affected employees positions at different branches if we wanted to continue working there. Some took the offer, others, like me, used the settlement money to start fresh elsewhere. Sometimes I wonder how many other Rogers are out there, using their positions of authority to exploit people in ways we'd never imagine. How many other employees are unknowingly performing for audiences they never agreed to entertain. It's changed how I view workplace power dynamics forever. The most disturbing revelation came months later, when one of Roger's subscribers was arrested in a separate case. During questioning, he revealed that Roger had been planning to launch a spin-off site featuring home visits to employees who had been terminated. I don't know exactly what that would have entailed, but the implication keeps me awake at night. I've started my own business now, working independently. No bosses, no employees, no power imbalances, and definitely no video calls unless absolutely necessary. And even then, only with people I trust completely. Some wounds heal with time, but the awareness that you've been violated in such a fundamental way, that stays with you. Revenge is a dish best served cold, but one person took it to a legally binding extreme. High school was a living nightmare, thanks to Sarah Thompson. While most teens deal with typical drama, Sarah took bullying to an Olympic level. From freshman year, she made me her personal target. It started with the usual nasty rumors, backhanded comments, exclusion from social events. But Sarah was creative in her cruelty. She once created a fake social media account in my name, posting horrible comments about teachers and students. By the time the school traced it back to her, the damage was done. Everyone thought I was the monster. She regularly accidentally spilled drinks on me in the cafeteria or knocked my books into puddles. Junior year, she managed to get her hands on my phone and sent inappropriate messages to a teacher. I was suspended for 2 weeks before the truth came out. The breaking point came senior year when she accused me of stealing prescription medication from her backpack. She planted empty pill bottles in my locker, and despite my protests, I was expelled 3 months before graduation. I had to complete my diploma at an alternative school, which killed my chances at the college scholarships I'd been counting on. My parents couldn't afford a legal battle with the Thompsons. Her father, Richard, was a successful businessman, and her mother came from old money. They had resources. We didn't. So I swallowed the injustice and moved on with my life as best I could. Fast forward 10 years. I'd worked my way through community college, then state university, eventually landing a job in finance. I wasn't wealthy by any means, but I was stable and building a decent life. Meanwhile, Sarah had burned through her trust fund, failed out of 3 colleges, and developed a reputation for burning bridges. I probably would have forgotten all about Sarah if fate hadn't thrown us together again. I was back in my hometown visiting my parents when I ran into Richard Thompson at a coffee shop. He looked nothing like the imposing, confident man I remembered. He was frail, confused, and trying to remember how to pay for his coffee. I stepped in to help, and he looked at me with vague recognition. "Do I know you?" he asked. "I went to school with your daughter," I said, keeping it neutral. "Oh, Sarah," he said, his face falling. "She doesn't visit much anymore, not since her mother passed." I hadn't heard about Mrs. Thompson's death. Apparently, she died of cancer 2 years earlier, and Richard had been declining ever since, diagnosed with early-onset dementia that was progressing faster than expected. "Sarah's supposed to check on me, but she's busy, I guess," he said, the hurt evident in his voice. Something shifted in me that day. Maybe it was seeing how vulnerable Richard had become, or maybe it was learning that Sarah was still treating people poorly. Either way, I found myself offering to drive him home. That's when everything unraveled. His once immaculate house was in disarray. Bills were piling up unpaid. Medication was disorganized. He clearly wasn't receiving proper care, despite the considerable Thompson fortune that should have provided for him. I started visiting Richard regularly, helping organize his affairs and taking him to doctor appointments. He was grateful for the company and assistance. Over time, he shared more about his situation with Sarah. She'd stop by once a month at most, usually asking for money before disappearing again. She'd hired a part-time aide who was supposed to come daily but often didn't show up. "I don't know what will happen to me," he confessed during a lucid moment. "Sarah's the only family I have left, and she doesn't care if I live or die." After 3 months of helping Richard, I consulted an elder law attorney about his options. That's when I learned about adult adoption, a legal process where one adult adopts another, creating a new parent-child relationship. It's uncommon but perfectly legal, especially in cases where vulnerable seniors need protection. The lawyer explained that if Richard adopted me during a lucid period, I would become his legal child with the same rights as Sarah, including decision-making authority for his care and eventually inheritance rights. More importantly, I could ensure he received proper care for his remaining years. I presented the option to Richard during one of his clearest days. I explained that I wasn't interested in his money, but wanted to make sure he was protected. After thinking it over and consulting with his own attorney, I insisted on this. Richard agreed. The adoption was finalized 3 weeks later, making me legally his child and Sarah's sibling. Sarah didn't find out until she showed up unannounced a month later, demanding money. I was there, helping Richard with dinner. "What are you doing in my father's house?" she demanded. Richard smiled. "Sarah, this is my child now too. The papers are all signed." The look on her face was worth every minute of torment she'd put me through in high school. Pure shock, followed by rage when she realized what this meant. And here's where it gets absurd. As Richard's legal child and acting as his healthcare proxy due to his diminished capacity, I now had control over the Thompson estate, the family home, the investments, the inheritance Sarah had been counting on. Legally, I had a say in all of it. "You can't do this," she sputtered. "I'll fight it in court." "You're welcome to try," I said calmly. The adoption is legal. Richard was evaluated by two separate doctors who confirmed he was competent when he signed the papers. But legal battles are expensive, and from what Richard tells me, you're not exactly flush with cash these days. She stormed out, but she was back the next day with a different approach. Fake kindness. She wanted to reconnect with her father and build a relationship with her new sibling. I almost admired the performance. That's when I implemented what some might call my petty revenge. Since I was now responsible for Richard's estate and well-being, I established rules for Sarah's visits. She could see her father, but only with my permission and supervision. If she wanted access to any family funds, she needed to earn it. I'm treating you exactly how parents treat their children, I explained. Since you've acted irresponsibly with money and visits, you're grounded. I set a curfew for her visits. I took the keys to her remaining family vehicles, cars that technically belonged to Richard's estate. I put her on an allowance based on her behavior and contributions to her father's care. Was it mature? No. Was it legally within my rights as both Richard's adopted child and his designated caretaker? Absolutely. Things went from bad to unhinged when Sarah realized I was serious. She tried to take Richard from the house one day while I was at work, but I'd already informed his doctors, neighbors, and the local police about the situation. When she claimed she was rescuing him from me, no one believed her. Her history of neglect was well documented by this point. She tried hiring a lawyer, but without access to family funds, she couldn't afford the lengthy court battle required to contest the adoption. Every attorney she consulted told her the same thing. The adoption was legal, I wasn't misusing any funds, I kept meticulous records, and Richard was receiving excellent care. My favorite part of this whole arrangement? I required Sarah to write sincere apology letters to everyone she had bullied in high school before she could have unsupervised visits with her father. I contacted dozens of former classmates, many of whom were still dealing with the emotional scars of her torment. The letters had to be specific, acknowledging exactly what she had done and how it had impacted them. "This is ridiculous," she complained. "That was over 10 years ago. And yet people are still hurting," I replied. "Actions have consequences, Sarah. Even delayed ones." Richard lived for another 2 years, receiving the best care money could buy. He spent his final days comfortable, well cared for, and visited regularly by both of his children, though one visited willingly and the other through carefully structured obligations. When he passed, the inheritance was legally split between Sarah and me. I took only enough to cover the expenses I'd incurred caring for him, and donated the rest to elder abuse prevention programs. Sarah got her portion, but only after completing financial management courses and community service hours. Stipulations I was legally allowed to place on the inheritance as co-executor. Petty? Absolutely. Satisfying? Completely. Legal? Entirely. Some people collect stamps, others collect coins, but one dentist had a much more disturbing hobby. I thought I knew my wife after 7 years of marriage. Emily was brilliant, compassionate, and meticulous. Everything you'd want in both a spouse and a dentist. She owned a successful practice in our small town, treating everyone from toddlers getting their first checkup to seniors needing denture fittings. I was proud of her, bragged about her at every opportunity. My wife, the doctor, I'd say. Even though I knew dentists technically weren't medical doctors, she never corrected me. When Emily suggested that most of my family start seeing her professionally, it made perfect sense. She offered family discounts, knew all their medical histories through me, and genuinely seemed to care about their well-being. Over the years, my parents, 2 sisters, 3 nieces, and even my grandmother became her patients. "I like keeping it in the family," she'd say with that perfect smile she was so good at crafting for others. I never questioned why she always insisted on personally handling any extractions for my family members. I thought it was sweet. She wanted to ensure they received the gentlest care possible. When my sister needed her wisdom teeth removed, Emily scheduled it after hours. When my niece's baby teeth weren't falling out properly, Emily took care of it herself rather than referring her to a pediatric specialist. The truth started unraveling last month when I was searching for our holiday decorations in the basement. Emily keeps everything organized in clear plastic bins with printed labels, Halloween, Christmas, Easter, etc. But pushed behind the seasonal bins was a small metal lockbox I'd never seen before. It wasn't locked, which seemed odd given how security conscious Emily normally is. Inside were dozens of teeth, not the kind of plastic tooth models dentists use for demonstrations, Actual human teeth. Some were tiny baby teeth, others were clearly adult molars and incisors. A few even had gold fillings or crown fragments attached. Each was in its own tiny Ziploc bag with a label. Margaret Sullivan, mother-in-law, left upper molar, 04/16/2019, or Jessie Sullivan, sister-in-law, wisdom tooth, 32/07/22/2020. I recognized all the names, my family members, my mother's bridge work, my nephew's baby teeth, my grandfather's gold-filled molar from before he passed, all meticulously catalogued and preserved. My first thought was professional misconduct. Maybe Emily was keeping extracted teeth for some legitimate dental research, but forgot to get proper consent. That had to be it. There was probably a reasonable explanation that I was overlooking in my shock. I waited until she came home that evening, the metal box sitting on our kitchen island. When she saw it, her face didn't register guilt, or even surprise, just resignation, like she'd been expecting this moment. "I can explain," she said quietly, "but you need to see everything first." That's when everything unraveled. Emily led me to her home office, a room I rarely entered out of respect for her privacy and her need for a professional space. She moved the antique Persian rug aside, revealing a trapdoor I never knew existed. Our house was over 100 years old, with plenty of quirky architectural features, so a hidden storage space wasn't completely shocking. What was inside, however, defied all explanation. A small room, perhaps 6 by 6 feet, illuminated by electric candles. The walls were covered in symbols drawn in what looked like red ink. Please be ink, I thought. In the center stood a small table with an arrangement that could only be described as an altar. And on that altar, arranged in precise geometric patterns, were more teeth. My family's teeth. "It's not what you think," Emily said, though I couldn't begin to articulate what I thought. "What exactly am I supposed to think when my wife has a literal tooth fairy lair under our house?" I managed to ask. And here's where it gets absurd. Emily explained that teeth, especially those from blood relatives, contained powerful spiritual energy. Each tooth carried the essence of its owner and could be used in rituals to influence their lives or channel energy towards specific outcomes. "Dental school taught me the science of teeth," she said, her voice growing more confident as she elaborated. "But my grandmother taught me their power. Teeth are the only exposed bone in the human body. They're uniquely positioned between the internal and external worlds. They're literally crystalline structures growing from our bodies. How could they not be magical?" She showed me a leather-bound notebook filled with handwritten spells and ritual instructions. My mother's molar was positioned at the north point of a pattern designed to strengthen family bonds. My niece's baby tooth was being used in a protection circle, and my sister's impacted wisdom tooth, the one that had caused her so much pain, was part of what Emily called a justified retribution working, aimed at my sister's abusive ex-boyfriend. "He broke her arm, Jason," Emily said when she saw my expression. "The police did nothing. Someone had to do something." Then came the breaking point. Emily revealed that she believed her dental workings had been responsible for my recent promotion, my sister's recovery from depression, and my parents' reconciliation after their brief separation. More disturbingly, she credited her tooth magic for her competitor across town, developing hand tremors that ended his career, and for my sister's ex-boyfriend's mysterious illness. "These aren't coincidences," she insisted. "I've been protecting our family, all of you." I couldn't reconcile the rational, scientific woman I'd married with this person standing before me, earnestly explaining the magical properties of bicuspids. She was dead serious, showing me how different teeth worked for different spells due to their shape and position in the mouth. Incisors for cutting ties, molars for grinding down resistance, canines for protection and aggression. "The wisdom teeth are the most powerful," she explained. "They come in at adulthood, carrying all the knowledge and potential of a fully formed person." I asked the question that had been building since I opened that first box. "Do your patients know you're keeping their teeth for this?" Emily looked genuinely confused. "Why would they need to know? They'd already surrendered the teeth. Most people don't want them back." "But these are my family members. You specifically offered to treat them. You insisted on handling all their extractions personally." She didn't even try to deny it. "Of course I did. family teeth are more powerful because of our connection to them through you. I'm helping them. I'm helping us. I spent that night in a hotel. The next morning, I consulted both a lawyer and a therapist, unsure which I needed more. The lawyer was clear that while there were ethical issues with a dentist keeping extracted teeth without explicit consent, the legal lines were blurry. The therapist suggested that Emily might be experiencing a complex delusion requiring psychiatric intervention. When I returned home, Emily had removed the tooth filter and sealed the trapdoor. "I'll get rid of everything if that's what you want," she said. "But you've benefited from this too. Think about how lucky we've been." I couldn't look at her the same way. Every time she smiled, I imagined her sorting through bloody extracted teeth by moonlight. When she kissed me, I wondered if she was absorbing my dental essence, or whatever she believed in. The woman I loved had been replaced by someone I didn't recognize, someone who believed she could curse people with bicuspids. I filed for divorce the following week. That's when things went from weird to legally bizarre. Emily's attorney claimed the tooth collection should be considered marital property since it was acquired during our marriage. My attorney argued that human remains couldn't be treated as property, and that the collection itself represented evidence of professional misconduct. The divorce proceedings are ongoing. Emily's dental license is under review. My family is slowly learning why they need to find new dentists, though I've spared them the supernatural details. I've told them only that Emily was keeping extracted teeth without proper consent, which is disturbing enough without adding magic circles and revenge spells to the mix. I've had all my dental work checked by another provider. No cavities, but plenty of trust issues. I now keep my toothbrush locked in a cabinet, and I've never been more diligent about flossing. Not for dental health, it just feels like basic self-defense. Medical professionals violating trust is horrifying, but imagine finding out your surgery was someone's paid entertainment. I've never been a fan of hospitals. Something about the sterile corridors, the antiseptic smell, and the uncomfortable gowns that never quite close properly in the back always put me on edge. But when my gallbladder decided to wage war against the rest of my body, I didn't have much choice. After weeks of excruciating pain and a diet limited to foods with all the flavor of wet cardboard, my doctor referred me to Dr. Matthew Brennan, supposedly one of the best surgeons in the state for laparoscopic procedures. Our initial consultation went well. He was charming, confident, and took time to explain the procedure in detail. He had an impressive wall of certifications and a warmth that made me feel like I was in good hands. I scheduled the surgery for the following month, relieved to finally have an end date for my suffering. The day of the operation, I was nervous but ready. The nurse prepped me, started my IV, and wheeled me into the operating room where Dr. Brennan and his team were setting up. That's when I noticed something odd. There were more cameras than seemed necessary. When I asked about them, a nurse casually mentioned they were for teaching purposes and assured me it was standard procedure. Something felt off, but before I could question further, the anesthesiologist was telling me to count backward from 10. I made it to 7 before everything went dark. The surgery itself was successful. My gallbladder was removed without complications, and I was discharged the next day with the standard warnings about rest, hydration, and monitoring my incision sites. I should have been focused entirely on recovery, but something kept nagging at me about those cameras. 2 weeks into my recovery, I received a text from Maria, a nurse I knew from college who worked at the same hospital. "Hey, isn't Dr. Brennan your surgeon?" Followed by a link. I clicked it, expecting perhaps a news article about a medical breakthrough or an award. Instead, I found myself staring at an OnlyFans page titled Inside Operations with Dr. B. The profile picture showed a masked surgeon, unmistakably Dr. Brennan, holding surgical tools. The bio read, "Exclusive behind-the-scenes access to real surgeries. Medical professionals and enthusiasts. See what really happens on the operating table. 50-month subscription. Weekly live procedures." My stomach dropped. With shaking hands, I subscribed, using a temporary credit card number just in case this was some elaborate scam. It wasn't. Within minutes, I had access to dozens of videos, actual surgeries filmed from multiple angles, with Dr. Brennan providing commentary throughout. And there I was. My operation from start to finish had over 10,000 views. My unconscious body, my exposed internal organs, all on display for anyone willing to pay the subscription fee. I could see my face clearly in several shots, my name visible on charts. There was zero attempt to protect my identity. That's when everything unraveled. As I forced myself to watch the video, I heard Dr. Brennan making jokes about my body while I lay unconscious. "Check out the fatty deposits around this gallbladder," he laughed to his surgical team. No surprise there given the patient's BMI. But that wasn't even the worst part. He was interacting with viewers in real time. Dr. Curious, 69, thinks this will take 42 minutes to complete. Anyone want to take that bet? I'm saying 38. Tops. He was gambling on my surgery duration while subscribers watched and commented. I scrolled through the page in horror. This wasn't a one-time violation. He'd been doing this for nearly 2 years. Hundreds of surgeries, all streamed to paying subscribers. Children having tonsillectomies. Elderly patients undergoing hip replacements. A woman's C-section with her newborn's first moments broadcast to strangers. I downloaded everything I could as evidence, then vomited until there was nothing left but bile. The violation was so profound, so intimate. These weren't just privacy breaches. These were people at their most vulnerable, unconscious, and literally opened up, turned into entertainment for profit. I contacted a lawyer that same day. She was initially skeptical until I showed her the evidence. By the end of our meeting, she was already drafting letters to the hospital administration, the state medical board, and the police. The case blew wide open within days. The hospital claimed complete ignorance, distancing themselves from Dr. Brennan faster than you could say liability. The medical board launched an emergency investigation. Local news picked up the story, careful to protect victims' identities while condemning the surgeon's actions. And here's where it gets absurd. The investigation revealed that Dr. Brennan had made over $2 million from his subscription service. He had a premium tier at $200 per month, where subscribers could request specific camera angles or commentary during surgeries. He'd even installed special equipment in the operating rooms, high-definition cameras with zoom capabilities, additional lighting, and wireless transmitters, all disguised as legitimate medical technology. His subscribers weren't just random voyeurs. They included medical students using the streams as unauthorized study materials, competing surgeons watching his techniques, and people with disturbing surgical fetishes. The comment sections were filled with a horrifying mix of clinical observations, cruel jokes, and explicit remarks. The list of victims grew daily as more patients were identified from the videos. Local politicians who had used their positions to get preferential treatment were suddenly scrambling to stay anonymous. Parents were devastated to learn their children's surgeries had been broadcast. Elderly patients, many with dementia, would never even know they'd been exploited. Dr. Brennan's defense was pathetic. He claimed the videos were educational and that he was democratizing medical knowledge. When pressed about the betting, jokes, and lack of consent, he argued that patients had signed standard forms allowing photography for medical purposes, as if that covered streaming their surgeries to paying subscribers. His medical license was revoked within months. Criminal charges followed, violations of privacy laws, fraud, exploitation of unconscious persons. The hospital fired his entire surgical team for their complicity, though several claimed they'd been afraid to report him due to his influence. I became the lead plaintiff in a class action lawsuit representing over 500 patients. The legal proceedings are ongoing, but the hospital has already offered a substantial settlement to avoid a public trial. They know they can't win against the evidence we have, but no amount of money can undo the damage. I've developed severe medical anxiety. The thought of needing another surgery someday fills me with panic. I've had nightmares where I'm awake during an operation but paralyzed, forced to listen as doctors mock me while strangers watch. I've been in therapy for months, but the therapist admitted she's never dealt with this specific type of violation before. The most disturbing part is wondering how many other Dr. Brennans are out there. How many other medical professionals are exploiting their positions of trust for profit? Every time I see a camera in a medical setting now, I question its purpose. The sacred trust between doctor and patient feels irreparably broken. The irony isn't lost on me that in trying to heal my body, I ended up with deeper wounds than I started with, ones that don't show on any scan and can't be removed with a scalpel. Privacy violations in the digital age go beyond video. Sometimes people are literally selling pieces of you. When I first moved in with Jake, I thought I'd hit the roommate jackpot. He was clean, quiet, paid rent on time, and even offered to handle chores I hated. While most roommates bicker over unwashed dishes or midnight noise, Jake volunteered to do my laundry and empty the bathroom trash regularly. I'm a bit of a neat freak, he explained with a shrug. It bothers me more to see it sitting there than to just deal with it. Who was I to question such generosity? For 6 months, our arrangement was perfect. Jake worked from home as a freelance web designer, while I commuted to my marketing job. We shared occasional meals, watched movies on weekends, but generally gave each other space. He was the ideal roommate, helpful without being intrusive. Then came the email that changed everything. Hello, I think we might be related. According to Gene Connect, we share enough DNA to be third cousins. Would love to connect and compare family trees. I stared at my phone in confusion. I'd never used any genealogy service. No 23andMe, no Ancestry.com, nothing. I'd always been mildly curious about my heritage, but never curious enough to actually spit in a tube and mail it to strangers. Yet here was someone claiming we were genetically related. I responded cautiously, explaining there must be a mistake since I'd never submitted my DNA for analysis. Their reply was what first sent a chill down my spine. That's strange. Your profile is definitely on Gene Connect. It was uploaded about 3 months ago under the username jsullivan.1988, which I assumed was you since your name is Jason Sullivan and you were born in 1988. There's even a photo that looks like you. Someone had created an account in my name and uploaded my genetic information without my knowledge or consent. But how? DNA testing requires a saliva sample or cheek swab, something physically from my body. I created my own account on Gene Connect and sure enough, found a profile that was undeniably mine. It included a photo clearly taken from my Instagram, my correct birth date, and detailed genetic information showing ancestry percentages, carrier status for various genetic conditions, and potential relatives, including the person who'd emailed me. That's when everything unraveled. I started investigating how this could have happened, and the trail led directly back to Jake. The account had been created using an email address that was a slight variation of his usual one, jake.walters88@gmail, instead of his regular jake.walters1988 When I confronted him, he initially denied everything, but his face gave him away. After some pressure, he cracked. Look, it's not a big deal, he said defensively. People do this all the time. Do what exactly? I demanded. The truth was more disturbing than anything I could have imagined. Jake hadn't been doing my laundry and emptying my trash out of kindness. He'd been harvesting my DNA, collecting hair from my hairbrush, saliva from cups I'd used, even cells from tissues I'd thrown away, and he'd been selling it. There's a whole community of true crime enthusiasts who recreate famous crime scenes, he explained as if this somehow made it normal. They want authenticity, so they use real DNA to make their recreations more legitimate. And here's where it gets absurd. Jake had built a small business around collecting and selling DNA samples from his roommates. Not just me, but at least 6 others before me. He had a website, customer reviews, even a pricing structure based on the quality and quantity of the samples. Hair follicles went for $50 per gram. Saliva samples started at $75. Blood, which he claimed to obtain from accidentally nicked razors in the bathroom, commanded premium prices of $200 for a small vial. It's not like I'm hurting anyone, he insisted. The stuff was just going to be thrown away anyway. When I asked him to show me where my DNA had ended up, he reluctantly opened his laptop and showed me his sales records. My genetic material had been sold to over a dozen different buyers across the world, including someone in Germany who had purchased multiple samples of my hair over several months. Jake pulled up a YouTube channel where one customer had used my DNA to recreate the famous Black Dahlia murder scene. There, in a video with over 100,000 views, was a crime scene diorama featuring blood samples that had come from me. The creator proudly explained in the description how they used authentic human DNA to create the most realistic recreation possible. Then came the breaking point. Jake showed me an email from his German customer, which included photos of how he'd used my hair samples. This person had created what could only be described as a shrine, with strands of my hair arranged in patterns around photos of me taken from social media. Candles, cryptic symbols, and journal pages filled with rambling text surrounded the display. Yeah, that guy's probably the weirdest customer, Jake admitted, but he pays really well. I was speechless. While I'd been living my normal life, pieces of me, my actual genetic material, were being shipped around the world to strangers who were using them in ways I couldn't even fully comprehend. My DNA was being analyzed, displayed, and manipulated without my knowledge or consent. I called the police immediately. When they arrived, Jake tried to maintain that he hadn't broken any laws. Surprisingly, he wasn't entirely wrong. The officers explained that while what he'd done was unquestionably unethical, the legal boundaries around DNA collection and distribution were murky at best. If he took items you discarded as trash, technically they weren't protected by privacy laws, the officer explained uncomfortably. It's a grey area that legislation hasn't fully caught up with yet. They agreed to investigate further, particularly regarding the identity theft aspect of creating accounts in my name, but they weren't optimistic about pressing serious charges. When the officers searched Jake's room, they discovered the full extent of his operation. He had a mini-lab set up with preservation chemicals, sterile collection tools, and a detailed cataloging system. Labeled bags contained samples not just from me, but from previous roommates, all organized by source, date collected, and quality. He even had a customer database with preferences and purchase history. The biohazard cleanup team that came afterwards said it was one of the strangest collections they'd ever encountered outside of a medical setting. One technician compared it to a serial killer's trophy room, but for DNA instead of actual body parts. Jake had made over $15,000 in the past 5 years through this macabre business venture. When I asked him why, his answer was pathetically simple. It was easy money and nobody was getting hurt. Except people were getting hurt. I was hurt. My sense of safety and privacy had been completely violated. I couldn't even look at ordinary household items the same way. Every cup, tissue, or hairbrush now seemed like a potential source of exposure. I moved out that same day, staying with a friend until I could find a new place. I've since gotten an apartment where I live alone, despite the higher cost. The idea of having a roommate again makes me physically ill. The legal case against Jake is ongoing, but expectations are low. I've learned that our laws simply haven't caught up to this type of violation. The police suggested I could potentially pursue a civil case for invasion of privacy, but there's little precedent for DNA theft of this nature. Meanwhile, I'm left trying to track down and remove my genetic information from various websites. I've contacted every buyer on Jake's list, demanding they destroy my samples. Some have complied, others have ignored me completely. The German collector deleted his social media accounts when contacted, which is perhaps the most unsettling response of all. I now clean my own apartment obsessively. I shred tissues before discarding them. I flush hair from my brush down the toilet. I wash glasses immediately after using them. Friends think I'm being paranoid, but they haven't had pieces of themselves distributed across the globe like biological souvenirs. The most disturbing part? Jake is already living with a new roommate. I tried to warn them, but they thought I was the crazy one. Bad relationships leave scars, but imagine discovering your ex turned your breakup into a group therapy business. I was scrolling through Facebook last month when a message from Alex popped up. "Dude, you need to see this," with a link to an event page. I clicked it expecting maybe a concert announcement or a party invitation. Instead, I found myself staring at the most surreal thing I'd ever seen. Survivors of Dating, Marcus Chen, monthly meetup, $20 admission, limited to 30 participants. Join us in a safe space to process your experience and heal from the relationship patterns of Marcus. The event creator, my ex-girlfriend Brittany. Brittany and I had dated for about 8 months 2 years ago. The breakup wasn't great. She wanted to move in together, I wasn't ready, and things ended with some harsh words on both sides. But we'd been civil when we ran into each other since then. Or so I thought. I stared at the event details in disbelief. 23 people had already RSVP'd. 23! I'd only had 5 serious relationships in my entire life, including Brittany. Maybe 8 if you counted those 3-month college things that never really got off the ground. Even if every woman I'd ever taken on more than 2 dates showed up, we wouldn't hit 23. "This has to be a joke," I texted Alex. "I don't think it is," he replied. "My girlfriend's coworker mentioned attending something like this, said it was really empowering, but wouldn't give details when I asked questions." I sat with this information for a full day, cycling through disbelief, anger, and morbid curiosity. Finally, I decided I needed to see this for myself. The event was being held at Cornerstone Cafe, a hipster coffee shop downtown with private meeting rooms. I created a fake Facebook profile using an old college photo where I had different hair and glasses and RSVP'd as Mark Chang. When the day arrived, I wore a beanie pulled low, glasses I normally use just for reading, and clothes that weren't my usual style. I arrived early, ordered a coffee, and sat in a corner pretending to work on my laptop while I waited for others to arrive. Brittany showed up 30 minutes before the scheduled start, carrying a stack of what looked like booklets and a lockbox for money. She set up at a large table in the private room, arranging chairs in a circle. People started arriving, mostly women in their 20s and 30s, but also two men. Each person paid Brittany at the door and received one of the booklets. That's when everything unraveled. When everyone was settled, I slipped into the meeting room and took an empty chair. Up close, I could see the booklet title, Healing from Marcus, A Guided Journey to Recovery. It had a silhouette that was unmistakably my profile on the cover. Brittany began with an introduction, describing herself as a relationship trauma recovery coach who had specialized experience with the manipulation tactics of Marcus Chen. She spoke about me as if I were some kind of master manipulator, a calculated emotional abuser who had left a trail of traumatized partners. Before we begin sharing, please turn to page 5 in your workbook, where we've outlined the common red flags that Marcus displays in relationships. I discreetly opened the booklet and my jaw nearly hit the floor. There, in professionally formatted bullet points, were completely mundane aspects of my personality and habits. Excessive video game use as avoidance tactic, PlayStation specifically. Strategic forgetting of anniversaries and important dates. Love bombing with Korean food before implementing control tactics. Triangulation with female friends to create insecurity. These were absurd distortions of reality. Yes, I played PlayStation sometimes. I forgot our 6-month anniversary once because I had a work deadline. I cooked Korean food for Brittany because I'm literally Korean American, and that's the food I grew up eating. And I have female friends because I'm a normal person, with friends of different genders. And here's where it gets absurd. As people started sharing their Marcus stories, I realized something incredible. I had never dated most of these people. One woman described a vacation to Miami, where I supposedly abandoned her at a club. I've never been to Miami. A man claimed I had borrowed $5,000 from him and ghosted. I had never seen this person in my life. Out of the 23 attendees, I recognized only 4. Brittany, my high school girlfriend Jade, a woman named Taylor I'd dated for about 2 months, and someone I'd gone on exactly 2 coffee dates with 3 years ago. Everyone else was either a complete stranger or someone I might have met once at a party. Brittany was charging $20 per person for these sessions, which meant she was making over $400 each month just from attendance fees. But she was also selling additional materials, the recovery workbooks for $25, private healing sessions for $75 an hour, and even Marcus-free certification for $150 after completing her 8-week program. She had turned me into a business, a literal business model based on fabricated trauma. I sat there becoming increasingly angry as people shared wild stories about things I had supposedly done. According to these strangers, I was simultaneously a cheapskate and a reckless spender, emotionally unavailable and suffocatingly clingy, workaholic and lazy, too sexual and not sexual enough. I was Schrödinger's terrible boyfriend, existing in all possible negative states simultaneously. Then came the breaking point. Brittany announced they were creating a spiritual cleansing ritual for the next session, where attendees would bring items I'd given them or photos of me to burn in a releasing ceremony. She was charging an additional $30 for this special event. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, removed my beanie and glasses, and cleared my throat. I think there's been some confusion, I said. I'm Marcus Chen, and I've never met most of you in my life. The room exploded into chaos. Some people looked horrified, others confused. 2 women immediately gathered their things and practically ran out the door. Brittany's face went through about 5 different emotions before settling on indignant outrage. "This is a private event," she sputtered. "You're violating a safe space." "A safe space where you charge people to tell lies about me?" I countered, holding up the workbook. Where you're making money by defaming me and fabricating stories? The remaining attendees looked back and forth between us like they were watching a tennis match. One brave soul raised her hand. Wait, so you're not the Marcus who abandoned his girlfriend at her sister's wedding to go to a gaming convention? I've never done that in my life, I said. I don't even know who you are. Things went from bad to unhinged as it became clear that Brittany had been coaching attendees on what their experiences with me had been. Several admitted they'd never met me, but had joined the group for therapeutic role-playing to work through issues with other men in their lives. Brittany had apparently provided them with template experiences based on her own grievances, which they had then personalized. When cornered, Brittany tried to spin the whole thing as therapeutic performance art and an empowerment exercise that was never meant to be taken literally. She claimed the group was about processing archetypal male behaviors, and I was just a symbolic representation. I informed her that defamation isn't protected as performance art, and that I'd be contacting a lawyer. I took photos of the event, the workbooks, and her payment setup before leaving. The Survivors of Dating Marcus group disbanded immediately after my appearance. Brittany sent me a cease and desist letter claiming I had violated the privacy of a therapeutic space, which my lawyer said was creative fiction at best. We sent our own letter demanding she stop using my name and likeness for commercial purposes. While she stopped running the in-person group, Brittany pivoted to a new venture, a podcast called Red Flag Relationships, where she discusses toxic dating patterns. The first episode was titled The Avoidant Gamer, When His Virtual World Matters More Than Yours. She never mentions me by name, but anyone who knows me would recognize the thinly veiled references. My lawyer says it's just vague enough to avoid another legal challenge, so I've decided to let it go. I've learned that fighting someone this committed to their narrative only gives them more material. The whole experience has left me paranoid about dating. How many other exes are out there, monetizing their grievances against former partners? Is there an entire underground economy of relationship revenge businesses I never knew about? I've started asking new dates to sign an NDA before the second date. I'm kidding. Kind of. Family dysfunction hits different when your own parents decide you're replaceable. I was 16 when I ran away from home. My parents and I had been fighting for months about everything. My grades, my friends, my clothes, even how I loaded the dishwasher. Every interaction felt like walking through a minefield. The final explosion happened on a Tuesday night over dinner. Dad had found rolling papers in my backpack. They weren't even mine. They belonged to my friend Caleb, but trying to explain that only made things worse. We didn't raise you to be this way, Mum had said, disappointment dripping from every word. Where did we go wrong with you, Brandon? Dad went further. Maybe you shouldn't come home until you figure out how to be the son we deserve. So I took him at his word. I packed a backpack with clothes, emptied my meager savings account, and left a note saying simply, I'll come back when I'm the son you deserve. I spent those 3 months staying with friends, couch surfing, and eventually finding a room to rent from an elderly woman who needed help around her house in exchange for reduced rent. I worked at a car wash, kept up with my schoolwork online, and spent a lot of time thinking about my relationship with my parents. I missed them, despite everything. By month 3, I felt ready to go home, humble myself a bit, and try to rebuild our family. I should have called first. When I arrived at our house using my key to open the front door, I called out, Mum, Dad, I'm home. The response wasn't what I expected. My mother came rushing from the kitchen, her face registering shock rather than relief or joy. Brandon, what are you doing here? Before I could answer, another voice called from upstairs, Mom, who's at the door? And then he appeared at the top of the stairs, a boy about my age, wearing my favorite hoodie, with my exact haircut. That's when everything unraveled. For several seconds, we just stared at each other, me, my mother, and this doppelganger who had apparently taken my place. Dad came in from the garage, and his face fell when he saw me. You should have called first, he said as if I was a distant acquaintance dropping by unannounced, not their son returning home. The boy came downstairs and stood awkwardly by my parents. He looked uncertain, glancing between them and me. Brandon, my mother said carefully, this is Brandon. I laughed because what else could I possibly do? Very funny. Who is this really? My parents exchanged looks before my father sighed. After you left, we weren't coping well. Our therapist suggested a Therapeutic tool. Tool, I repeated, staring at the kid wearing my clothes. I'm a therapeutic replacement, the other Brandon explained, looking genuinely uncomfortable. It's a kind of immersion therapy for parents dealing with loss. I'm an actor. I couldn't process what I was hearing. My parents had hired someone to replace me, like I was a broken appliance. We didn't think you were coming back, Mum said defensively. You left without a word. I left a note, I interrupted, and you never tried to find me. Not one text, not one call. Dad straightened his posture, shifting into the authoritative stance I knew too well. The therapist advised us not to. Said you needed to come back on your own terms. The replacement Brandon, I couldn't bear to think of him with my name, shuffled awkwardly. I should probably give you guys some privacy, he said. No, stay, my father said, putting a hand on his shoulder. You're part of this family now. And here's where it gets absurd. My parents proceeded to explain that new Brandon had been living in our home for nearly 2 months. They'd shown him family videos so he could study my mannerisms. They'd given him my room, my clothes, even my car. He was enrolled in my school, answering to my name, living my entire life. He's been a real comfort, Mum said, as if this explained everything. He helps with dinner every night, keeps his room clean, and his grades are excellent. I looked at this imposter wearing my life like a costume. He had the decency to look ashamed. So what happens now? I asked, my voice hollow. You have 2 Brandons? My parents exchanged another look, one of those silent communications that married couples master. My mother brightened with what she clearly thought was a brilliant solution. You could be brothers, she suggested. Brandon could keep using your room since he's settled in, and we could convert the office for you. They wanted me to share my identity, my home, even my name with this stranger. They wanted to keep my replacement while slotting me into a new, secondary role. I was being demoted in my own family. That's when I noticed more details that turned my stomach. On the mantel were new family photos, my parents with new Brandon at places we'd never taken me. There was one from a beach trip the previous weekend. They were all smiling, but that wasn't even the worst part. New Brandon eventually pulled me aside while my parents were in the kitchen discussing logistics. I'm really sorry, he said quietly. I didn't know you'd come back, but there's something you should know. I'm not the first. What do you mean? Your parents, they've done this before, twice, with other therapeutic replacement services. He looked genuinely troubled. I only found out last week when I found a box of photos in the attic. There were 2 other Brandons before me, from different agencies. One lasted 3 months, another almost a year. My entire reality collapsed. My parents hadn't just replaced me once in desperation. This was a pattern. When the real me became too difficult, they'd simply swap in a more compliant version. How long had this been going on? Had there been replacements during previous fights when I'd stayed at friends' houses for a few days? I left within the hour. I didn't take anything from my room. It didn't feel like mine anymore. New Brandon tried to give me back my hoodie, but I couldn't bear to touch it. Keep it, I said. You're Brandon now. I went back to my rented room at Mrs. Petrovich's house. She took one look at my face and made me tea without asking questions. The next day, I filed for emancipation with the help of a legal aid clinic. My parents didn't contest it. I kept tabs on the situation through mutual friends. New Brandon lasted 8 months before my parents let him go. Apparently, the novelty of a perfect son wore off when they realized he was just acting a part. The performance couldn't be maintained indefinitely. My parents tried reaching out about a year after I left. They sent emails, letters, even came by Mrs. Petrovich's house once. They said they'd realized their mistake, that they'd been wrong, that they wanted to make amends. But some things can't be undone. By then, I'd graduated early through an accelerated program, had a steady job at an auto repair shop, and had built a chosen family of friends who accepted me as I was. Mrs. Petrovich had become more of a parent to me than either of my biological ones ever were. I sometimes wonder about the other Brandons, how many there really were, what happened to them after their contracts ended, whether they ever think about the strange family that temporarily adopted them. I wonder if my parents have found new ways to avoid dealing with reality, new shortcuts around the hard work of actual relationships. Last I heard, they'd moved to Arizona. Sometimes I get birthday cards. I don't open them. Some replacements are permanent. And finally, the story that will make you side-eye every garage sale you pass. I started noticing something weird happening with my underwear drawer. midway through senior year. Boxers and briefs I just bought would mysteriously disappear after only wearing them once or twice. At first, I thought maybe I was just losing track of my laundry, or that Mom had accidentally shrunk some in the wash. When I mentioned it to her, she just shrugged and suggested we buy more. "Teenage boys are hard on clothes," she said dismissively. "You probably rip them and don't remember." I accepted this explanation because, well, what teenage boy wants to have prolonged conversations about underwear with his mom? So I just kept replacing them when they disappeared, annoyed but not suspicious. Everything changed the day Mr. Peterson, my chemistry teacher, made a comment that made my blood run cold. I was reaching up to write an equation on the whiteboard when my shirt rode up slightly. As I turned back toward the class, he smirked and said, "Nice choice of boxers today, Carson. The blue ones with the lightning bolts are definitely your style." I froze. I was indeed wearing blue boxers with lightning bolts, but my pants hadn't slipped low enough for anyone to see them. And the way he said it, like he was letting me in on a private joke, sent ice through my veins. Throughout the day, I became hyper-aware of the way certain male teachers looked at me. Coach Wilson's lingering gaze in the hallway, Principal Hernandez's strangely specific compliment about how put together I always was, Mr. Grayson from English asking if I'd tried any new brands lately, with a weird emphasis I couldn't understand. When I got home, I tore through my drawers, counting every pair of underwear I owned. I was missing at least 20 pairs over the past few months. This wasn't normal laundry loss. Something was happening, and somehow my teachers knew what underwear I owned. That's when I decided to investigate. I set up a simple experiment. I bought new distinctive underwear, bright red with pineapples, and made sure they went into the laundry hamper after wearing them once. Then I watched our laundry routine like a hawk. 2 days later, those pineapple boxers never made it from the hamper to the washing machine. They simply vanished between me putting them in the dirty clothes and the laundry being done, and the only person who had access to the hamper was my mum. I couldn't confront her directly. The accusation forming in my mind was too bizarre, too horrifying to put into words. Instead, I decided to follow her the next time she went out on a Saturday, her usual me time when she claimed to be running errands or meeting friends for coffee. So that Saturday, I borrowed my neighbor's car so she wouldn't recognize mine, and tailed her from a distance. She drove to the mall parking lot, but instead of going inside, she parked near the outer edge and waited. After about 10 minutes, another car pulled up beside her, a car I recognized with sickening clarity as belonging to Mr. Davidson, the vice principal. That's when everything unraveled. I watched from a distance as my mother handed him a small package, and he gave her what looked like cash. The exchange took less than 30 seconds, and then he drove away. Mum stayed in the parking lot for another hour, meeting 3 more cars, all belonging to male staff members from my school. Each time the same quick exchange, package for cash. I felt physically ill. The pieces were coming together in the most horrifying puzzle imaginable. My mother was selling my used underwear to my teachers. When I returned home, I searched her bedroom while she was out grocery shopping. In her closet, I found a shoebox containing a ledger, with names, dates, amounts, and preferences. Peterson, blue athletic, $40. Wilson, briefs only, 35 tons. Hernandez, worn 2+ days, $60. The list went back 3 years since I started high school. There were over a dozen names, all men who worked at my school. Some had specific requests about how long I should wear the underwear before she collected them. Others paid premiums for certain activities like after gym or after weekend sports. But that wasn't even the worst part. At the back of the ledger was a price list for premium items, photos of me changing, taken through what must have been a hidden camera in my bedroom, clippings of my hair, even used towels. My mother had turned me into a one-person black market of personal items, catering to the twisted fetishes of the very men who were supposed to be educating and protecting me. I documented everything with my phone, the ledger, the inventory of missing clothes I'd kept, Mr. Peterson's comment I'd recorded after it happened. Then I went to stay with my dad, who lived in another state. I hadn't seen him much since my parents' divorce when I was 10, but this was an emergency. When I showed him the evidence, he was livid. He immediately called a lawyer and the superintendent of schools. Within days, an investigation was launched. The evidence was overwhelming. Not just my documentation, but texts between my mother and her clients that were uncovered. bank records showing regular cash deposits coinciding with the dates in her ledger, and eventually confessions from some of the staff involved. In total, 7 staff members were fired, including the principal. 2 were arrested for possession of the photos my mother had taken, which constituted child pornography since some dated back to when I was a minor. My mother was charged with exploitation of a minor, invasion of privacy, and contributing to the corruption of minors. When confronted by investigators, my mother's defense was pathetic. I was saving for his college fund. Do you know how expensive tuition is these days? I was just being resourceful. Resourceful. That's what she called selling her son's underwear to the men responsible for his education. The scandal exploded across our small town. I couldn't walk down the street without feeling like everyone was staring, whispering, pitying me. I transferred to a school in my dad's town to finish senior year, but the damage was done. My trust in authority figures, in the educational system, even in basic privacy, was shattered. My mother took a plea deal to avoid jail time, probation, mandatory counseling, and a restraining order keeping her away from me and any schools. She's tried to contact me repeatedly, sending letters claiming she did it for me and that someday I'll understand a mother's sacrifice. I've been in therapy for 2 years now. It's helped with the anxiety, the trust issues, the constant feeling of violation. My dad and I have built a good relationship. He's supported me through college applications, helped me work through the anger and betrayal. Mum and I don't speak. I don't know if we ever will again. Some betrayals cut too deep, break something too fundamental to repair. I'm moving forward with my life, but I still check my drawers every morning, counting what's there, reassuring myself that everything is accounted for. Some habits are hard to break when they were formed in survival. Sweet dreams, everyone, and remember, sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones hiding in plain sight, wearing familiar faces and sharing our dinner tables. If these stories kept you up tonight, don't worry. Tomorrow's upload will dig even deeper into the Reddit rabbit hole. Until then, lock your doors, check your security cameras, and maybe, just maybe, clear your browser history. Good night, Reddit family.